Foreshortening figures makes them dynamic and exciting. And this demo by Peter Hahn will show you how you can apply perspective to make captivating figures.
Most people who do this exercise will always stay in the safe side of things. We're afraid of producing something that's not going to make sense. I would say the simplest approach would be to start from the torso or the back end and work your way forward as a constructive method. Because you can gradually get bigger and it's still going to work, but sometimes you don't know how large to dictate that scale change. So as you maybe have a certain sizing and you try to go back, you may not really push it as much as you need to. So starting from the back to the front actually might be a little bit easier. So let's have that reaching out of the arm, and let's make it a bit more articulate. Let's draw in first the head. The head is not going to be overly detailed. We'll place in the information of detail into the figure's body. So here's where the head's going to be. This is where the shoulder is going to go. And as the shoulder reaches out, we're going to actually overlap this arm to the upper arm here. Wow. And we'll place in the elbow here to the wrist over here.
It already looks dramatic.
And we'll have the hand over here. And the hand's going to be, actually, with fingers now and articulated and all that kind of stuff. But as you'll notice, if I isolate that forearm section out, the forearm is obviously changing in sizing and going up in scale like this. But if we look at the human anatomy, and let's say just from a top view of the human arm, the forearm is going to go from thick to thin, from the elbow down to the wrist. So naturally, there is muscle mass that is built to the upper portion of the forearm down into the wrist region. Now, by putting it in that position of a foreshortened effect, naturally the wrist region is much wider than the elbow area. So visually, it looks awkward. It doesn't seem to fit very well. So once I have that position filled in, what I do is I actually increase the volume of muscle mass to the elbow region as it connects into the deltoid, near the tricep muscle. By incorporating the silhouette of the human anatomy, the visual read will be there. But what makes it work is that the scale of this is still much larger compared to the elbow region, but the silhouette change of that has now accommodated for this effect of thick and thin. So as I then go into the hand, this is where the knuckles and the fingers will be. And we'll quickly draw out some of these little details at first. And we're going to do the actual wide angle shot of the character in full, the humanoid creature in full body pose.
It's just so convincing. You started with the big forms to get the big effect, and now you're putting in the smaller parts to make it more specific.
Yes. So the details are then always come last. So as we went from something that is just cylinders, ideas of shapes and forms, we're going to start to apply a little bit of information, a detailing of the anatomy or the muscle forms, and then all of a sudden it could be convincing as to what you're seeing in terms of observation of the actual thing. But again, there are certain balancing issues that can come into play where if you're unable to control it well visually, it can feel awkward at times and imbalanced. So that's why the foreshortening effect can be very difficult, because it's a combination of being able to build, but also to visually accommodate for certain aspects. So it requires then a lot of practice at that point. There's no real shortcut answer here in this situation. It's about being able to produce many of these and come to a conclusion that best fits your needs. So we'll go to this particular pose of this troll-like character, and we have this pose in mind, and we kind of established the idea of where hand position was, how the legs are being articulated. He's obviously going to be holding something in his left arm. Head is hunched down a little bit, forward arcing to the body, and we're going to play with a slightly wide-angle lens, and we'll do it from a top-down angle first.
Learn lots of practical techniques at proko.com/perspective with many more assignments, demos, and wisdom from Peter Hahn. You will understand this challenging skill.
We know that the 4-point perspective in a grid can be something like this, to give you the spherical look, and how the vanishing points can be quite close to each other, which really forces that strong read. So then we get this kind of warped out feel in the center area. I'm not going to actually take that and establish it in a grid over here. We just want to use the idea of it, how lines can curve left to right, up and down. That's really what I want to just basically hold on to as an idea. So let's take this idea where we have, let's say, the shoulder line over here. This is going to be the back region. His head's going to be here, and his shoulders in that position. Let's move the right shoulder a little bit more forward. And now his arm's going to come down. And again, same thing. I want there to be a scale change. So his right arm coming down this direction. We're going to bring and squeeze that scale way down.
It's daring to exaggerate.
Oh yes, and that's the thing about this, that the exaggeration is really tough, and that's why the experimentation is so important. Most people who would do this exercise will always stay in the safe side of things. It's not because you're trying to, it's what we can visually control. We can see it and we can understand it. We're afraid of producing something that's not going to make sense. So we tend to stay away from the things that are overly too extreme. We'll have this arm going back this direction. Now, this is the part that's really difficult. I know that as this character is standing, you'll notice that this is a forward lean. As I place in that information of notes over here, as I had done this iteration, I wanted to push him more forward to get that position more accurate. So having it more forward from a down angle view, I know that the chest region is going to overlap the mid region of the torso. So as the chest of this region is being indicated with a line all the way through, I know that his internal or the hip region is going to be overlapped. You won't be able to see it. And this is really the hard part about, producing these kind of images, that you're not going to be able to draw certain things because you can't see them, but you don't know exactly where they are. Again, like I said, this is where in this particular exercise, in the beginning, people maybe should do some thumbnails. They should explore a little bit, try to figure out what makes visually more sense to you. And if you feel like it's not necessarily well foreshortened or wide angled, it's because you're playing it too safe and you're showing too much of the body. So it flattens it out and takes the angle of the camera and pushes it more down low towards the front of the view of the character.
So this is what you were mentioning earlier about you have to lose something. At this point, you're going to lose that pelvic block. One part's going to be in front of it.
Yep.
That's just what happens with foreshortening.
What happens? You just lose information. And you'll notice a lot of this, especially if you're into things like graphic novels and comics. For myself, when I was practicing a lot of posing and compositions of characters and illustrations that will be interacting with each other, especially like fight scenes or interactive scenes of some type, when it has more than one, you have to find the way to position the camera that really shows off the best composition of the two. The problem in a lot of times in comics, especially if you look at covers and whatnot, they're not necessarily presenting it in a more realistic manner. They're just positioning the characters to be more sellable, to be more marketable. So they're always positioning the characters to be front views, facing the viewer. It rarely ever shows the back of the head of a character, So, and if they did, usually, you have a more believable scene. But usually you wouldn't get that. So every time I would draw characters that were interacting, I would try to push the camera, but the problem is I would flatten them out because I would try to show so much of them in their silhouette. And I would also then turn the figures both towards the camera. And so it wouldn't really make spatial sense of how they would interact with each other. So here we have the legs stemming out, and I'm imagining internally this is where the hip would be behind it. Whatever shape that is doesn't really matter because you can't see it. So as it comes down, this is where the knee is, comes down this direction. And the foot again will be small. So here's where the arm is going to end. So we have the head scale really large, and we have the feet at the bottom really small. Let's throw in some shapes and forms for the lower legs.
It's got the effect that when you were a kid looking at superhero comics and seeing how dynamic they looked and how much bigger than life.
Right.
That this get the camera in there in the action and show you what happens was a part of it.
So you can kind of almost imagine how these lines are going to recede back that direction. This is going to go back this way. This is going to come around like that. And this will taper down this direction. That will go up that way. Now this is below the horizon line. So you don't see this going up that direction towards the top above. So this is why this is going to kind of end off of that region. But if the horizon was a bit lower, then you're positioning the camera slightly differently, you could potentially squeeze the figure of the head to be going up and smaller and then go wide towards the mid-torso of the body, then squeeze it back down again towards the legs. So you can actually take a figure and do that.
This is all happening in the bottom half of that diagram in the upper left.
Yes. Again, we'll take the next illustration. We'll do a little bit more detail work and we'll go straight into that one. This one I just wanted to build for you guys again. And to be quite honest with you, I find the top-down shot a lot easier than the up shot. So I took the other shot to be the one I'm going to straight go into, but I find that to be more difficult. So I still do find these challenging. They're not easy. They're fun. And there's ranges of levels of how much you can push.
How do you assign to students to turn this into a project or exercise?
In the beginning, we do the exercise I had shown prior, which is to take the character or person of reference, and we draw that reference as is, and decipher the forms and the shapes of the object and get good proportions. And we able to, or from there, show me examples of what I just done over here. 3, 4, 5 different angles of view of the camera of the same pose. Not really pushing foreshortening or wide angle lenses, but making sure the forms and the positions are as accurate as you can make it. From there, we then play with the foreshortening effect afterwards. When we do this, though, I still recommend we do exercises in the beginning by looking at camera work. So studying lenses. What do lens effects do to certain objects or people? And we find then reference images that show the example of it, and we then try to draw from those first. Seeing the data of how that works from an actual camera, we then try to plug it in to imagine things as well, too.
That's what we're doing in this course. Do you assign subject matter?
Well, most of this stuff will be applied towards a figure. Maybe my dynamic figure class, I'll be playing a lot with this in. In dynamic sketching, we don't necessarily push this as much, the foreshortened effect, because that class as a foundation is being able to only just train your eyes to see the forms. That's really more what it's about.
That's dynamic sketching.
Sketching, yeah. So the dynamic figure class of posing, I want to be able to actually push this a lot more to get the figure to be as extreme as I need it to be, but also within the safe parameters as well, too. So the dynamic figure class will play with this a lot more.
So the dynamic figure class is the more advanced class.
It is.
And the dynamic sketching class is the foundation that prepares you for that.
Right.
It makes perfect sense.
Exactly. So now this humanoid form is established from a down angle view. You can see the scale of the head down to this portion down over here. And again, if I did take a small little thumbnail, you can go much further than that in terms of how the scale of the head is over here. Let's say we take the upper torso, here's the upper arm, and we then push it way down.
Really daring.
And we take the legs and we make them really small. But that's the thing about this, is that as you experiment, you find out, well, what works and what doesn't work aesthetically. We're still taking the same idea of scale change and squeezing things and pushing stuff, but sometimes it becomes so much that I don't like the way it looks. It doesn't really work for me.
Right, but it was how much of an investment of time was it? It was an experiment to say, let's see how far can I push it.
Exactly. And so there's a weird disconnect from the upper body to the lower legs because the extreme pushes just so much that it doesn't really work for me. I would say something in between this might be workable, but that's something that's close enough as a dynamic action that I need to have. So even though I see that, it's like, I probably would never use this. So that's why a sketchbook and exploration, you gotta not just think of it, but you have to act on it. You gotta see it.
Part of what we're doing in this course is that there is a science to how things change when you get close, but we don't want to be too preoccupied with the science. We want to be more preoccupied with experimenting with options to where one of them looks the way we want to.
Yes. So, okay, what we're going to do now, I already placed a note mark in there. We're going to do an up angle shot. We're going to stay to his front. His right arm will be to the same side. So it'll be essentially this camera positioning that we did in the up angle, but now we're bringing the camera below him down to his feet. Then we put the camera really close to his feet looking up. So we're going to get quite a strong foreshortening from his knee to his arm. So with this one, I'm not going to construct as much. We're just going to go straight in there and draw in the details of this actual creature-esque troll-looking thing. And we'll see how much we get. So this one will probably take me about a good 20 minutes to 15 minutes.
Oh, it's wonderful already.
So here's his upper arm coming down to the lower arm. And we'll take the torso, turn it that direction. This is going to be where the head is. The ear's going to come up that way. The thing is, again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not constructing as much, but it doesn't mean I'm not constructing at all. There is constructive lines in there. It's just that they're not as prevalent or revealing to the audience. They're revealing to me. I know where things are. Let's have this leg coming towards, landmark there.
I can almost see you seeing it. Little hints.
So we're going to also place in a couple of bits of articles of clothing now. We'll dress up and add some accessories if we can. This is where the knee is going to go. And again, he's going to be holding some sort of satchel or bag over here. And because he was a humanoid creature, I'm playing with his proportion. We're making his arms really long, and we can, do these kind of weird things with imagined and creative things like that. And it's always really fun to do. That's where his foot's going to be. Here's another one over here. So as we place in all these marks, I'm going to tie everything together once we start to place in more details. Let's place in some additional features. And maybe also in this arm, we'll put something in there. So this kind of thing is definitely more of an area of exploration for me these days. I would say within the last 5 years or so, it's been an area of focus to really, not to control it, but to introduce it more and more into my work. When I was a student, I would say a lot of this stuff was out of my reach and not within a scope of interest as much, mainly because of the fact that it wasn't even within the scope of an idea. I didn't really think about how I could manipulate these kind of things. It wasn't until after, training, getting into work and exploring more of my sketching, that I felt like a lot of my work was a bit too flat and safe. I wasn't really pushing it as much as I could have. And if I wanted to expand on my confidence of being able to turn form, I wanted to train in this field a lot more. So I would say within the last 5 years or more, that's been an emphasis of what I wanted to do further. So of course, it took many number of years with the intention in mind to explore it, to get to a level in which I feel a bit more confident within, but I still feel like I'm, still on that path to really discover how much further I can take this. Because currently where I'm at within my skill set, with what I'm trying to focus on, it's not only just about being able to push things like this of, scale or wide angle lenses or foreshortened effects. It's trying to actually shake off some of the constraints of the techniques and fundamentals that have been so baked into me. I think those techniques and methods are important to always hold on to, but I feel like I wonder, it's like, is it also then restricting my growth to a certain degree? Because again, much like we talked about music and jazz and movement, I come from a mindset where it's always been about following this step and technique. And I always got a very kind of formulated result and a predictable result a lot of times. And it was good and I liked them. But I felt like I was now starting to hit that point of like, where else can I now go beyond that? And beyond was, for me, loosening that tightness of following an order of direction so constrictively. And so at this point, I'm still trying to figure out what that even is and what that even means. And I don't think I'm remotely anywhere close to what that is going to be. In our conversations with many artists that we favor and we are inspired by, obviously guys like Heinrich Klei comes into that equation, where I'm fundamentally not like that. I don't draw like he does when I was coming up.
Yeah, well, we've been analyzing his work lately. He just seems to throw away the rules left, right, sideways, and every other way. But after he has had such astonishing command of them, he then says, now I'm going to draw it like a little kid. Now I'm going to make a stick figure. Now I'm going to just do a whole bunch of swirls. Now I'm going to make these expressive lines. Now I'm going to make a character who it doesn't quite make sense, but the fact that it doesn't make sense is part of what's so interesting about it. I think you're in a position like what was happening so much in the 20th century with jazz musicians, of whatever the musical style of jazz had established itself, there's going to be somebody who comes out and say, yeah, but I'm not completely happy with that. And they're going to take it to another direction or another level. But yeah, I think that does come from some dissatisfaction.
There's definitely a curiosity there, because I feel like I'm moving into a territory that I haven't really reached into enough just yet. And I do see some results. And that's another factor about this, is that it's not to say that I'm not producing something that doesn't touch upon these areas. And because I'm able to touch upon it and show slight evidence to it, it creates even more enthusiasm, more excitement. because there's no longer fear of like, I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm not those kind of artists, and I'm always going to be the type that's going to be controlled and methods of like what dynamic sketching kind of offers in a more logical sense of idea. And naturally, as an individual, I am more logical in that kind of approach. But in the kind of sketches I've been doing recently and lately in the last number of years, I've been trying to act this idea of movement and, energy and action, which is why when you discuss this concept of jazz being incorporated into sketching and drawing, if you had told me that, a couple of years ago, I mean, it would have sounded weird to me because I've always felt like I was much more controlled about things. So what you're seeing in the last number of years is definitely me trying to move into that territory further. So it took some time to not only to get comfortable with that idea, but having that curiosity of mind to look for it more, because I've been favoring that much more so than in recent times to loosen up.
I see another thing going on here too, and that is that when you started this one, you just kind of came alive. Your energy went toward the character, it seems, and even when you darken in his eye, the way that grimace, it seems like when you start freestyling, you start ideating of the particular personality or gnarl of this character, because you're no longer thinking so much about technique and about structure and form and anatomy as this guy.
Mm-hmm. I tend to find that when I overplan things, it doesn't come out as ideal as I would like to. So whenever I catch myself, let's say, working on something for someone else, and I tend to overplan, I act on it and I do it, but then I stop myself immediately and start over. I have to let it happen. I have to get it out of my system. So as soon as I act that way, maybe if the first half an hour goes by and I realize I'm being way too tight, and I completely just release that piece and I start over again. And that time is like, let's just move. And I always find myself producing much better things now. And then I also now plan for that. If it was a thing where I was doing that and it was hard to relinquish the control, or it wasn't something planned, I think that frustration would be there. I'm unable to understand why things aren't working. But because I'm able to predict it, I include it into my process and method that allows me to discover that approach. I feel much more comfortable moving into that territory. So a lot of even my working projects, freelance projects, anything else, client work, I give myself that moment to just instinctually, naturally react the way I would normally do so, by planning and strategizing and establishing everything I need to, and then throw it all away and start over. But it's no longer an accident. It's no longer a thing I fall into. It's something that I can now plan as a part of my method.
Yeah, you know what to expect now.
Yeah,
I sense that in you, Peter. I sense that when you start to throw off the planning analytical bit, that you get in the groove.
For sure. And that's what I'm saying earlier, that's at a point where I'm at within my own work, that I'm looking for the next plateaus of that. What else is there? How much, not about looser can I get, but how much more expression can I capture? It's no longer about the precision of techniques, more about what am I actually even drawing and what I want to say through it. So then technique and methods and tools are there as a reliance through muscle memory, but it's not necessarily the first thought.
Right. I used to be so confused when I would hear the contradiction between how important technique and skill was, and then to hear it almost excoriate. It is not about technique and skill. It's about something else. It's about spirit or vision or poetic view. And it's like, well, which one is more important? I think I understand it now, is that technique can be taught, whereas vision, it comes from the artist. Creativity, expressivity comes from somebody saying, I'm not happy with this, and it can be more this way. But they are the yin-yang of artistic creation. You need the skill, but the skill does not make it great.
Right. And, people shouldn't confuse our conversation by saying that, skill and technique, there has to be a certain order in how you work on things, or there should be more of a primary focus as to being more expressive and feeling oriented. I think it's a natural byproduct of how we just grow and mature in our work. I don't think it needs to be planned. I think it's going to happen naturally anyways through people. You just get to a certain level of experience and age, possibly as well too, where your mind tends to shift a little bit as to where your focus goes. I think, of course, all students should definitely, stay within those areas of fundamentals and techniques and understand them truly, which is why I teach those things, because I know the importance of them. But I'm also now discovering these new roads as I start to mature in my own work.
Yeah, I think dissatisfaction is a big part of it too. I think that when a person is so skilled in classic drawing, there comes a point where they become dissatisfied with it. And when a person is not skilled with it and they're trying to draw like you're trying to draw, and they recognize I can't because I did not get the training. That's another. This dissatisfaction can go both ways.
Yeah, so with this piece so far, I have a good feeling of where things are. So we had that down angle shot over here, and now we have the up angle shot right there. And so this will turn up that way, going back this direction.
Now we've got the top and bottom half starting to work of that diagram.
So once I establish those lines, you can kind of see where I'm seeing these arcs and turns and whatnot. Seeing this kind of stuff, of course, bringing up the subject or individual guys like Kim Jong-il, you know, when he would do something like this, I think it was always so difficult to watch him as either a young student or even as someone who's a professional, because when I would watch him, I understood everything he's talking about. But when you're a younger student and he's saying, well, you draw a cube and you draw this figure in there. Like, well, okay, but how do you draw the figure? You know?
He jumped from the cube to the figure quite a bit.
So because he jumped so extreme, but the problem was that was his basic. That was his most simple. And his most simple was way too advanced for most people. And I know this mainly because many conversations I've had with the people that work under Super Ronnie, that he'd have a hard time connecting with some of the younger students because it would be hard for them to grasp what his basic fundamental practice was supposed to be in a presentation. I'm not saying he's unable to communicate, you know, the things that we're talking about now, but in a performance of what he's trying to do, he's got to be able to obviously move into something more visually kind of interesting. So when you're seeing a lot of stuff on like YouTube and the stuff he communicates, there definitely is a bit of a gap in between, which he doesn't need to explain because he just does it. But when you're trying to learn it, it can be very overwhelming.
Yeah, but there was no ambiguity in him for how it happened, though. He was very clear when he made it clear that he has an envisioning skill that he developed and that he turned things into boxes and turned them into boxes and turned them into boxes, and that was how he navigated. So even though it was not a comprehensive course, he was the one who came along that set aside the silliness that all you got to do is take a life drawing class and copy the model and copy the model and copy the model and do gestures from it, and never learn about anatomy and form, which so many students didn't. And then he comes in, you've got to know what the cat looks like. And you've got to know what kind of a box it would be put in. And then we get those two together. Now, blam, 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 it all happens, but at least the foundational truth was in there.
So when he, came out in the early parts of 2010s, for me observing it, it's like I understood where all that stuff was coming from, because as a formerly trained, design student, the Viscom methods in building form and shape was a natural part of our, growth and our skills. So seeing what he was doing, I understood. It clicked instantly. So when people ask me, it's like, were you doing these kind of things when he came around? It's like, not necessarily. We were doing this kind of stuff when I was a teenager in 20s in my art center days. It's just that it wasn't necessarily applied so fluidly the way he was doing it. It wasn't necessarily presented on social media as much as it was, because it was never very marketable. People weren't very interested in seeing it. They wanted to see the final piece, which is why speed paintings and digital pieces became very popular, because it was quick and gestural, but it also produced something flashy, But these kind of more systems of techniques of sketching and drawing felt so archaic when we were doing it, that when you're trying to presenting it, most people find it kind of boring and whatnot. But he was able to put in that sense of charisma and energy that was him, that made it much more exciting in a lot of ways. So for us seeing that, it's like, oh, okay, that's another way to present it. And we understand how to do it. It's just that now here was somebody really, putting it in a package that just made it much more just like invigorating, which I think is why the next golden age of draftsmanship and drawing came about in 2010.
I think that too. He set the example and he inspired. Look what you can do. Right. And then all sorts of people started rising to the occasion.
Exactly.
There was no excuse not to.
Yeah.
When somebody shows what you can do, and people have been doing it, Jack Kirby did it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All sorts of, Winsor McKay you can see doing it.
For sure.
Cly obviously did it. And there is film of Winsor McKay drawing, but it's problematic because he doesn't do any preliminary drawing. He starts right out with the outlines around things, so it could confuse you. How do I do that if I don't know?
And so did Mobius, guys like him, where it's just amazing at freeform drawing. And I mean, but there's another danger to that. I think what people have started to define where perspective is now a style. and it's not a style, and that's what's been defined now. But all of a sudden you see someone like him or other artists that were saying, oh, are you doing the perspective style? Like, well, it's just a technique, and you can manipulate it and change it and apply it to a style set towards a medium, towards a storytelling project or illustration. But that's a lot of the younger students, I think, tend to mislabel or confuse the definition of that.
Yeah, that's part of why in this course I'm doing what I can to emphasize that this is practical skill, but it is not the end of the story. And one very important and useful facet of your art education. Well, people wouldn't look at this necessarily and say, oh, that's something that you would include in a perspective course. But those lines on the ground and those lines that you explained earlier show that they're there, and even if you hadn't drawn them in, I think you probably drew those in as much for the students as you did for yourself, because I think you see it even without having to do it at this point.
Here's a little bit of treasure and stuff he's hiding behind his satchel, maybe stealing something as a thief. Evidence of a little storytelling.
Peter, this is wonderful.
So we just make things up as we go, and then at the end of the day, we also just have fun with just producing and being creative and sketching, and not everything has to be done for some form of, expectation. We do it because we enjoy doing this all the time. When I was a kid, this is all I did. Even when I was very young, preteen and stuff like that, I was always imagining and drawing characters and creatures and stuff like that out of my head. And so, where does that come from? Of course, I think everyone's wired in certain ways, and how we absorb information, how we express ideas and have creative thoughts, of course, is unique to individuals. But I think everybody can achieve a certain remote level of not just comfort, but excitement and enjoyability within the things that we do that enables the encouragement to keep pursuing it. So,
you like to draw, don't you?
A little bit, quite a bit, actually. Maybe a little bit too much. That's all I end up focusing on every single day. So here's a humanoid troll creature now from an up-angle shot. We have now a little bit of contextual information of what's going on. So we have now the variances of angles that we played with from a foreshortening to a down-angle shot, which I could have done the same exact information of stuff, then also this iteration as we go up.
Great.
It's open for myself to control to whatever degree of level I want to position in the character, or to the camera angle, to adding some more details or taking some things away or stylistically changing things. There's no wall there.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you.
If you want to gain the skills you need for extreme angles in your own work, go to Proko.com/perspective.